We're back with Sean Jordan of StrataPress. Hi, Sean.
Hello, Thomas.
Great to see you. Today, we're going to chat about depreciation reports, and it's a good time for it because, as most in British Columbia will know, July 1st is the deadline for everyone to be up to date on their new 5-year cycle DR.
All right.
Yeah. So glad to have you with us.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks. And that's good timing. You're right. I wasn't even thinking about that when the new depreciation reports are. There's been some changes there, I guess. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm back. StrataPress. That's me on the picture, and I've been working on StrataPress for the last 10 years or so. I've had experience working on 3 different strata councils over a 15-year period, and have a background in online technologies, produced hundreds of online projects for companies around the world. And I completed my property management license course at one point about 25 years ago, but I never worked as a licensed property manager. I was just doing it for my own interest to manage some investment properties on the west coast of Vancouver Island with some other investors. So that's where we are with StrataPress. We sell documents online, probably about, I'd say, about 500,000 documents exchange hands, or 500,000 pages of strata information exchange hands every month through StrataPress. And we have the Strata Owners Portal, which gives Strata owners access to their strata information, communications, documents, everything about your strata you can get through StrataPress, either as a self-managed strata, or if you're working with one of the partner property management companies we work with, we offer the portal through those companies as well. Fantastic. So here we are to talk about depreciation reports. So you know about these. I know about these. These came out.
I do. We hit a milestone this month, Sean. We've now looked at over 8,000 depreciation reports and reserve fund studies for condos across Canada in detail, and mapped out how they're going to be spending their money over the next 30 years, or the portion that remains in their reports.
Right.
So, yeah, from over 11,000 buildings we've looked at, that's a significant number of reports. So my team has looked at more of these than probably any human alive. And I hope so, because that's a lot.
Yeah, and they're important to look at. Depreciation reports are probably one of the most important planning tools for a strata corporation. And many owners don't even pay attention to them until there's a major cost, repair costs that arise. So a good depreciation report helps strata corporations plan ahead for those expenses and avoid levies, unexpected levies, those type of things. And so instead of reacting to emergencies, they're being proactive. It's kind of a proactive thing. And it does, there's some benefits there. When you actually get one done, you have a list of your major property assets in that report. You have a 30-year schedule kind of planning out what your expenditures are and when they're expected, and funding models, so you can accumulate the funds you need to pay for ongoing repairs or maintenance with a depreciation report.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
most people, when they buy a condo, they're buying the unit. They think that that's what they're in for. And as you and I know, they're actually owning their share of the corporation. That's the common elements of the entire building.
That's right.
This report covers that aspect of the community, regardless of what type it is.
Exactly.
So, yeah, tell us more.
All right. Well, there it is. What is a depreciation report? It's a long-term financial roadmap. Kind of answers 3 critical questions. What building components will eventually need repair or replacement? What will those repairs when will those repairs likely occur? That could be a year or 2 or 5 years down the road. And how much money should be set aside to pay for them? So like I said in that opening slide, it's kind of a roadmap for maintaining your building over the next 30 years. And there's some important points will come in this little presentation about the decisions and the funding models. And depending on, the individual strata owner, I know some people would think, I'm not going to be here for 30 years. So why do I want to pay all this up front? But we'll talk about that in a minute. So it's going to cover a lot of, looking at your building, your roofing, your elevators, your windows, parking membranes, plumbing systems, things like this. Everything gets reviewed in the report, and everything gets an estimate of what's its useful remaining life when are we going to have to replace this, and what are those future costs going to be? So it's important that strata owners understand, what the upcoming cost is going to be, and for them to plan for it as well, because they're part of the funding for all of these initiatives. So that's the long-term, long-winded explanation of what it is. So why does it matter? Because the report will help answer whether or not your strata fees will increase and by how much. Will you face a special levy in the near future? How much money should the strata be saving, to pay for these? You got your Contingency Reserve Fund. And I think, I don't know, is this, there's a question I got for you. Is this part of the Contingency Reserve Fund? Do people
Yes,
put the money in
absolutely.
for that? And is that
So
where
when
the
you see the strata needs to save, you got to remember the strata is the owners as a group,
yeah,
and BC now has a mandatory minimum contribution to your reserve fund every year that is based on your operating budget. It's nice that there's a minimum contribution, but the operating budget is not a good proxy for what you should be putting aside into your contingency reserve fund.
right,
In BC, we typically see that the 10% minimum is exceeded. We're now up to an average of, I think, between 15 and 17% of the operating budget now going to the contingency reserve fund,
wow,
which is a positive sign, but it's still way too low. When you look across the country, those that are adequately funding tend to be putting 30 to 40% plus of the operating budget towards the contingency reserve fund. And that is the owners as a group putting aside that money for these upcoming capital projects.
right.
So, yeah, great question.
Yeah. So with that said, I mean, you have a contingency reserve fund that's topped up and looks healthy, and you have a depreciation report when you're reviewing documents for a strata somewhere you're considering making an offer on a unit. Those will give you green lights or red flags as far as what you could expect. And that, part of what it says here, protecting proactive planning protects property values and at least the perceived value of what people are purchasing into. If you have, you're being proactive, your council's being proactive is better than being reactive. And I think I'd be much more, um, I guess, secure in purchasing in a strata community that has an up-to-date depreciation report and up-to-date or topped up contingency reserve fund. So that's something you got to look at closely. But there's parts of the report people look at more than the other. Um, so I think a lot of people just jump right to the planning, the financial planning. How are you going to pay for this over the next few years? Which is important, but we'll get into that
It is important. Yeah. And you're
upcoming
right. People do pay attention to this. I was speaking with someone that was looking at buying a condo. It was a substantial unit in a building that's now 30 years old.
Yeah,
And they have issues potentially with the envelope. And the depreciation report is in process right now, trying to meet this deadline, but it's not yet available. The last one is more than a decade old,
oh,
and they're not proceeding with the transaction until they see this updated report. They asked a friend in construction, "Hey, if this is a hanging wall replacement project, what's the order of magnitude?" And it was enough for them to slow down. So having a depreciation report that's current does really make a difference.
yeah, and the cost, because the cost of these repairs 5, 10 years ago especially are gonna be a lot different now.
That is
And
exactly right. Construction
yeah,
inflation has been higher
yeah,
than inflation across the board, and all of those the remaining useful life, as well as the costs, have evolved significantly.
yeah, and we'll cover that in an upcoming slide, just how you determine the funding model, because all these depreciation reports kind of provide different scenarios, short term, midterm, long term, you know, um, planning for it, but that's coming up. So legal requirements in BC under the Strata Property Act, most stratas are required. I say most because if you're under 3 units or three or less, or is it under
Four
five?
or less.
Four or less, you don't need to get one. But otherwise, they have to be updated every 5 years now, which is good. Because it used to be you could uh, defer that. Sorry, I'm fumbling over my words. Defer the depreciation report on a three-quarter vote with the strata, and that's no longer allowed. So you can't keep pushing it down the road. It has to get done. And yeah, I can understand the hesitation because there's a cost to this and there's a time requirement and obviously some commitment by council members if they're not working with a property manager to get the information required and give access to the building for engineers and financial papers, everything else. Because not only does that have to look at the health of the building structure, they got to look at your financial situation as well. So
It's
that's why
interesting.
there's firms that specialize just in depreciation reports because they have the team with the knowledge base across everything required. We'll get into that coming up.
Yeah,
But
good point. And there are some specific requirements now that have also been tightened because it used to be that anyone who had the reasonable skills and abilities could prepare one of these on behalf of a strata, and that has also changed.
that's changed.
Um, but I think that the requirement is there for a reason. The previous recommendation was a 3-year cycle. I think that is still a recommendation, and it's not a bad idea, especially for larger communities. But because so many communities deferred it with a three-quarter vote indefinitely, they came out with a clearer mandate that requires it every 5 years, and that's more
Yeah.
appropriate for buildings that might be a bit smaller. They don't need to incur that cost on a 3-year cycle, in the same way that a very large community might, still
Yeah.
find it beneficial to do so.
And I do get a lot of inquiries from realtors who purchase a depreciation report and they want to know if it's up, if this is up to date because it was done in like 2011 or something and a long time ago. And you have to go through all the minutes of meetings and AGMs and look to see if there's been any talk about a depreciation report because sometimes you'll find it was deferred or hasn't been done or there's no talk about it at all, or in the latest minutes they just started talking about it at the latest AGM.
Yeah,
And then the realtor asked, well, can I get a copy of the new report? I'm like, well, the minutes were produced like a month ago and these
yeah,
reports will typically take, yeah, they say 1 to 2 months for a small strata, but I think 6 months minimum, probably, with the delay being mostly about gathering documentation. So the council has to be prepared. Everybody has to be prepared. And then you have to get quotes and then you have to get the work done and then they have to produce the report. So I think 6 months minimum, only because it's at the speed of a strata corporation and everybody's volunteers. So again, just thinking from the
right.
self-managed perspective, professional management could probably get it done a lot quicker and
Yeah,
get the
if they're well
documentation
organized, it's a
if
couple
it's well
months
organized. Yeah.
process, and that's assuming that the engineering firm has the capacity. With the July 1st deadline, they've been very busy.
Yeah.
There's another deadline for areas outside of Metro Vancouver and the Greater Victoria area that kicks in next year. So I'm sure that it's just going to be a busy period for all involved. But
Now,
start the process as soon as you can if you haven't.
do you know, if you're a smaller strata corporations, do you have to qualify for an exemption or you just don't do it?
You don't have to do it. 5 or more units, it's required.
So you don't have to
So 4 or
apply
less,
anywhere. Yeah.
you're not required to do it. It's up to the discretion of the owners, and obviously, depending on your building type, that may or may not be, um, a
Yeah.
good or a recommended investment. So,
Right.
you will notice too, Sean, I'm sure you help a lot of smaller communities on StrataPress, that they have just different methods of filing documentation, different meeting cycle than a bigger community.
Hmm. Yeah. It seems a little less formal, a little more informal. We try to keep everybody on the same kind of standards of communication and timelines. I think is best, no matter what size your strata corporation is.
Good
So
point.
what depreciation report includes? So you're going to get a review of your building components. So that'd be like the roof and windows, the balconies, elevators, all the plumbing systems, electrical systems. They're going to look through everything, fire protection systems. They'll look at your parquets and exterior cladding, those type of things. And then on the financial side, they'll look at your contingency reserve fund balance, your operating budgets. If you have a previously produced depreciation report, they'll use that for reference as well. But if you don't, they'll need historical maintenance records so they can see when components were replaced or last worked on, those type of things.
Yeah.
Those are all that's the information going to require to produce the report. So, and there'll be a site visit as well. There'll be an engineer that comes out to see current condition of your property, kind of assess what the remaining lifespan is on you know, components of your building, see if
Yes,
there's any
because there's
visible.
this actuarial component where they have an expected life of a certain component, and then
Mhm.
there's the physical inspection that can say, "No, actually, the roof is in great shape. We think it'll last 5 years longer,
Right.
than originally intended or expected based on the roof type,
Yeah.
those assumptions." So, a pretty critical part of the overall process.
Yeah. And they'll probably want to have a conversation with a council member who's knows the building, so you can have some discussion about the current condition of the building. Estimating, like you said, lifespan of a roof. Just looking at it, I don't think anybody could really say, "Oh, that roof was, that's 3 years old, that's 5 years old, 10 years old." They look pretty much the same if they're maintained, but closer inspection, you can get a better understanding. But if you have the maintenance records, you know exactly when it was put on. So, yeah, recommendations for contingency reserve fund contributions, that'll be part of the consideration for the depreciation report,
And
which
I wanna
leads.
point out that this is not just a box ticking exercise. It's not like we
Yeah.
have to spend this money every 5 years. You talked about them speaking with the Strata Council. It is supposed to be an iterative process. When they've got a draft report, it's supposed to go to council. Council's supposed to review it, give the engineer any extra information that might be helpful in refining that report. There may be a sudden recollection of work that was done, that may cause the life of a certain asset to be different. There may be some discussion about the priorities of the community, and one element might be accelerated in terms of its replacement or refurbishment. Something else might be deferred. I've had a number of engineers join me to discuss uh, both reserve fund studies, depreciation reports, and other types of engineering. And what they've told us is that they don't own a crystal ball. They are working off of their expertise, that expected life of a specific asset. And one of them told me, and this was great from Michael Laporte, that effectively their goal is to be equally wrong across the board. So, if you have an estimate of life of a whole bunch of different assets, and a building might have anywhere from 30 to over 100 different components, some of them are going to last longer and some will last less than they initially expect. But like flipping a coin 100 times, you're unlikely to hit heads every time. You're going to end up coming out approximately right, even if individually some of your estimates are incorrect.
Yeah.
So this is not a crystal ball. This is meant to include a stage where the Strata Council goes back and forth with the engineer to talk about it, to get it right. Because at the end of the day, this is a guide. It's there to try and help plan, to try and help shape the future. And it's a really important one.
Yeah. Now you must have enough data, or the depreciation reports have been around long enough now. There's been, I think, in some properties, I see two or three versions of it over the last 10 or 12 years. Maybe it was 15 years ago they started being
Yeah, about
mandatory.
2013, we still see a lot of reports from around then. I think that's when the requirements,
Yeah.
became
So
official.
it'd be interesting to see a comparative kind of a report from a report, just to see how accurate they were on these estimates and timelines and things like that. It's
Absolutely,
going to take
because
some more than 10 years to figure that out, to see if how right they are, but it'd be interesting to see if they're. I've seen some
and
with.
we've been doing this for 3 or so years in detail, so we are seeing some buildings that have been through their 2nd and 3rd,
Right.
report from when we first saw it until we've updated. So, yes, we'll put out a project on that at some point, probably next year, Sean, because
Yeah.
there will be enough with this new 5-year cycle for us to have this analysis of before and after, and,
Right.
I'm sure all the engineering firms have a good picture of this as well, particularly for the communities that they've been involved with doing multiple times. Um, and I'm sure that that does feed into some of their actuarial work with respect to how long certain assets are expected to last in our particular climate, because, BC's temperate rainforest. We have a lot of water. We don't get that much snow unless you're living in the Okanagan or the, Whistler area.
Mhm.
But we do have slightly unique considerations, and I'm sure there's been a lot of learnings from that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Funding models explained. Okay. So this is the interesting stuff that people just want to jump to and see, oh, what's the cost going to be and what are we going to do? So there's typically three scenarios are provided with each report. There'd be option one, which is low contributions, so lower strata fees. So the risk of that is larger future special levies and more financial uncertainty. So let me just explain. So when I first did this, I didn't realize you're looking at a depreciation report the first time being on council and having never seen one. This is years ago. Um, I didn't realize that those were the models. Like you get, okay, you can choose here and go low fees, doesn't change much, widely accepted by the strata owners because of course costs don't go up. But then there's the middle kind of moderate fees. There's reduced levy risk. It's more predictable with planning. And then there's aggressive funding, your lowest risk of future levies, strongest reserve fund. But I mean, it's higher strata fees today. So I think I mentioned that earlier, just like, hey, I'm not going to be here in 10 years. I'm going to move, I'm going to retire, I'm going to do this or that. So most owners would go, well, I don't want to pay for future repairs, now and be contributing to something. Well, I'm not even going to live here. So they'll vote for the lower contributions with less work being done up front.
I
But
want to
that's
jump in there
yeah.
because there is a very big difference between the Canadian provinces, and BC has this depreciation report model where we show three different scenarios. Alberta and Ontario have a reserve fund study. Both of those provinces have, for 25 years, had a requirement that their buildings be adequately funded for the ongoing maintenance of the buildings. It's not a fully funded situation. You still find special assessments, as they call them there, special levies, as we call them in BC, when something happens unexpectedly early, costs more than planned. But generally speaking, they are properly funded and not able to say, oh, we want lower fees. And I'm a huge proponent of that system because, sure, you might be the owner that says that you're not going to be there in 10 years, but whoever's buying it from you is going to be there, and you should be paying for the consumption of the useful life of the assets of that building while you're in it. There's been a
Mhm.
lot of passing the buck to new buyers who are paying, in most cases, much more than they were, than somebody who purchased their condo 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago.
Right.
And so the person who has sold it to them has enjoyed this capital appreciation and not properly funded it for the future. I think that's an unreasonable passing of the buck, and in many cases to buyers who don't have the knowledge and the experience to fully understand what's coming at them. And of course, we
Yeah.
built Eli Report to help that audience better understand these things. But I think that the funding situation in this province needs to be further addressed with legislative measures, as they have been in other jurisdictions, to ensure that the frequency and magnitude of special levies is minimized.
Right. And yeah, balancing the fairness of the cost of maintenance of that building. So even so, choosing the lowest option, choosing the lowest contribution option, cheapest option today, often is the most expensive option long term.
Good
So
point.
you're gonna get the cheap thing yourself now, but you're gonna be passing that buck on to a future owner. And maybe that can be reflected in the value of the property when they look at the depreciation report and look at your funding and go, well, these people are not contributing as much as they should. And maybe that lowers the offer on your strata unit that you're trying to sell to
I
compensate for
certainly
that.
hope that people are aware of those issues. That's why we include a special levy forecast in Eli Report. It is there to help you understand what those are and to negotiate with the seller if you are seeing that there are some higher than anticipated special levies in the near term that were not evident from your initial visit to the property and when you fell in love with the condo itself and didn't yet appreciate that you were on the hook for your share of the rest of the
Right.
building.
Now, when you did depreciation reports, I remember the strata owners voting on the option that they wanted to do. I can't remember if we did it anonymously or not, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't left in the hands of the council to decide, oh, we're going to go with the low option or we're going to go with the aggressive option. It was put to a vote.
In
Um,
Alberta, for example, the condo board, the strata council, sets the budget for the year, and they decide what it is, and the owners pay. The
oh,
owners don't get to vote on the budget. In BC, the owners vote on the budget. So the Strata Council, together with the manager, if they have one, will put together a recommended scenario. Sometimes they'll include two, one with a slightly higher budget and higher reserve contributions and one without. I believe overwhelmingly the owners choose the lower one when given such an option. But they do tend to put in a scenario, and that scenario is voted on, and it's the budget itself, which includes the reserve fund contribution as one element of it, that does get voted on at the AGM. So you're absolutely right, Sean.
Yeah, and you'll see people, realtors, those who are helping you with due diligence on the purchase, can point out where funding is not going to be adequate and where you're going to probably be hit for higher strata fees down the road. Anybody I think who knows what they're doing should be able to figure that out by looking at the budgets, the Contingency Reserve Fund, and the Depreciation Report. Because I don't think you have to actually register, hey, we're going with the low version, because you have your council turns over and you're 3 years down the road. And if there's no documentation about, okay, are we looking at the depreciation report anymore? Or are we just kind of winging this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I don't know if people actually set that in stone going, okay, well, we all voted. We're going to do the balance contributions until we get the next report done. Maybe that's,
It's not.
sure.
It's a year by year. They're voting on that
Year by
annual
year.
budget,
Yeah.
and that's just the way that British Columbia has set up Strata. So
So your topic of depreciation report should come up at every AGM. I would think.
the budget does. The depreciation report, if it's within its window, used to be 3 years, now it's 5.
I just thought
It
for
may or may not
review.
be coming up in priority on an annual basis, but certainly as they're, putting together the budget, they're cognizant of what that
Yeah.
depreciation report
That's what I
says.
thought. In line with the depreciation report, the budget's presented. You could have argument, hey, the budget should be considering the depreciation report. In the so
Absolutely, and yet it is ultimately the decision of the owners, who get to vote at the budget at the AGM, and they can vote down a budget, and you have to call another meeting, and you have to approve a new revised budget, and hopefully this time you've got the support of the ownership group, to get
Right.
that revised budget through because, of course, it is mandatory.
Well, that's what our next slide is. How to evaluate the funding plans. So, as a strata owner, if you have to vote on it, you have to consider some stuff like the building age, owner demographics, affordability, market expectations, and any upcoming major projects. So, important question is, can owners absorb future levies, or should we be contributing to that now? Is a reserve fund keeping pace with inflation? And does the funding plan protect future owners fairly? So again, going back to like, yeah, we're going to be on the low end here and we'll just defer all those costs to somebody else who owns this place in the future. That's not fair. But there's rarely a perfect solution. The best plan is usually the most sustainable and predictable. So cost wise, you can afford, you're not going to get special levies coming at you unplanned, and you can do proactive maintenance instead of reactive stuff.
Absolutely. Once again, until we have a mandated solution in this province that's there through legislation, you're going to see that people tend to do the minimum or barely above the minimum, and not being more proactive as they probably should be.
Right. How to
All
get
right.
one done. Yes.
This is the
Okay.
most important part at this point. I mean, it's too late for you if you haven't started one to meet your July 1st deadline if you're
Yeah.
in the greater Vancouver or Metro Vancouver areas. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't be starting. So if you're not there yet, get it going. Reach out to some of the engineering firms. Take it away, Sean.
Yeah. There's building engineers, building envelope engineers. There's reserve fund specialists and building consultants. Many of these firms will specialize exclusively in strata depreciation reports. In fact, you can go to CHOA, you can do a Google search for depreciation report, CHOA, and you'll see they got a good document. It was updated last year about big PDF you can download about depreciation reports, but they're business directories at VISOA, the Vancouver Island Strata Owners Association, and CHOA. Those associations where you go to their business directory and you find engineers. Find a firm that specializes in depreciation reports. You get engineering expertise. They'll know costing of construction, be able to give you estimates on that, and they'll be able to do financial forecasting if you find the right company. So, and the process. I mentioned, some will say 2 to 6 months, depending on complexity, but
Yes.
typical, if it's a small strata under 50 units, you're gonna need 2 months minimum. That's the bottom line, I think. And then you get to
Yeah, I
large
think that's fair.
compacts, 200 plus, you probably could be 6 months to a year before you get that final document. Because even once it's
Hopefully you're well
report
organized and you can give them what they need so that they can get started, and they can certainly do it within a 6-month time
yes,
frame. It is absolutely reasonable, so long as they have the capacity. And you've mentioned where to find them, but do speak to 2, 3, or more of these firms to make sure that you find the right fit. Sure, you've
yes.
got the engineer that may have done your last report.
Look at
You've
the
got a
ones.
couple of recommendations, or
Yeah,
you've called a couple, but figure out how they work, how they approach the process, what their personal timeline and backlog looks like, because if they're 6 months out, it may or may not be a good fit for you. And then how do they approach the whole process of completing the report and having that conversation with counsel?
right.
You want to have somebody that you think understands you and wants to engage with your community. You're not looking for a cookie cutter report. Do not treat this as a box ticking exercise.
No, it's not just a legal document that was required, you put it on the shelf. But the biggest delay, yeah, you mentioned, couple things. I would look at the type of buildings that firm usually works with, because if you're going with a firm that typically does 200 unit plus stratas and you're 20 units, you don't need that. You want their expertise, but you don't need to pay for an entire staff of engineers. Look at what they're get somebody who's familiar with your type of building, I think is best. They know what to look for. If you don't have elevators, you don't, just consider those type of things. The biggest delays are usually gathering records and documentation. So the more organized the strata records are, the smoother and more accurate the whole process becomes. So yeah, easy to,
Excellent point.
yeah.
And you've got a slide here dedicated to everyone that should have an appreciation and understanding of what's in this report when you receive it.
Who should view the report? Yeah. So strata councils should review the report, of course. Property managers help coordinate implementation and budgeting, but the council has to look at it. Accountants and legal advisors may also assist with interpretation. You can have take it to somebody to review with you if you don't understand it. Talk to a legal advisor. Talk to a strata lawyer if you're not familiar or don't if you're not sure. Get your counsel, do some consulting. Um, so that's the owners should review the report as well. They don't need to read all 100 pages. Some of these reports can be very long. But they should look at like the executive summary to find key findings. They should look at what the major upcoming projects are. So what repairs are coming. They should look at the cost forecast so they know how much money is going to be needed. Look at the reserve fund analysis to see how healthy the reserve fund is, and look at the future recommendations in the report so you know how much should be contributed on a yearly basis for these things. So the report is used by the council for annual budgeting, for reserve fund contributions, capital planning, and for communication with the owners. So the worst thing a council can do is just, like I said, you said, place it on a shelf and ignore it. They should be referenced every year during budget discussions, primarily. So I did do some, biggest mistakes. I don't know where I put those notes, but I did make some notes on what are the biggest mistakes. Let me see if I can find that owners make with depreciation reports. I might have deleted it. Looks like I did. So
Well, I mean, I would say that not paying attention to what's in it's the obvious number one.
yeah,
Knowing what is coming, and there will
yeah,
be projections for each of the scenarios. So look at the scenario that reflects what your Strata Corporation is currently doing with respect to reserve funding. That will give you a good indication of approximately when you're going to have a levy and what it's for. Or come to me. We got Eli
mhm,
report. That's what it does. So, we use a series of standardized assumptions. We don't use the 3 scenarios. We say, okay, this is what the engineer thinks is going to happen over the 30-year life. This is your latest budget. This is the last known reserve fund balance, and we apply some math. What
right,
are you going to do if you stick on the same trajectory that you're on today? Um, so that's our
got it,
approach. But it all comes down to proper planning today that prevents bigger problems tomorrow. And I
right.
see this is your last slide, Sean.
This is where I put the mistakes. So as a common, yeah. So planning today prevents problems tomorrow. Be proactive with your planning. Strong planning financially reduces financial shock, deferred maintenance, and conflicts within the community on where money is being spent in an emergency, and those expenses get people all fired up. So common mistakes: treating the report as a legal requirement only. So the report is a planning tool. You're not doing it just to meet your legal obligations. Mistake number two: ignoring funding recommendations. The report only works if action follows. So if you're going to determine you're going to do this type of funding, you got to follow through with that. Mistake three: choosing the cheapest funding option. So as we mentioned earlier, lower fees today often means larger levies later. Number four: not updating the report because building conditions and construction costs change. So that's why it's good to have a 5-year mandatory now, because we've seen reports happen once 10 years ago and we have no idea how useful that information is anymore. So it's not a prediction document. It's a planning tool. No report's going to predict the future perfectly, but it'll help you anticipate major expenses, help you save money appropriately for those upcoming expenses, reduce any financial surprises, protect your property values, and most importantly, it helps everybody make informed decisions on the health of this building for the next 30 years. So,
Really great points, Sean. I can't even add anything to that.
good.
That was perfect.
There we go.
So yes, do get one. If you've got questions on it, speak to your Strata counsel, speak to your Strata manager. Or Sean said you can even address certain questions to your legal counsel if you don't have a Strata manager. But they're very familiar with these documents and the process, not only for getting them updated, but for understanding how that feeds into your budget, into your planning, and making those better decisions. If you are in a Strata and you're self-managed, hop on to StrataPress and book a meeting with Sean. Talk a little bit more about what they do for helping communication within your community and the delivery of some of these documents. It's a great feature set, and Sean's a great guy to work with. We hear from
Oh,
lots of owners. So,
thank you. And we're
yeah,
just
definitely do that. And I guess beyond that specifically, if you're in a community that is not on StrataPress, but you want some of these features, have a chat with your property manager, right? Like that's how you guys end up serving more managers, right, Sean?
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to you straight if you want to. We work with property management companies or self-managed stratas, and we're always introducing more features to make both those audiences more effective in managing their stratas. We are coming out now with we got accounting, bookkeeping features in StrataPress for self-managed stratas. It's really going to help with budgeting and tracking, and most importantly, the transition from one council to another being consistent with the information and centralizing everything is so important. And eventually maybe we'll have a little export option where it's like export my info for a depreciation report, which can bundle all the information we have about your property and your financials and previously uploaded documents, and give you something that you can provide an engineer to get started with. Ideas, always making things a
Wonderful.
little better. So
Sean, thanks so much for your time today. We'll have you back next month. And in the interim, everyone out there, stay safe.
thanks a lot.